to the rule of force versus Hamilton. To explain three So we are going to do those questions, and then that will tell you where you are. It will tell you where you are. So it's good that you give yourself an honest feedback. All the questions are easy, by the way. I tried generating hard questions, they were not coming. Usianze kurekod kabla nikwambie. Yeah, so shares is the capital of a company is divided into certain divisible units called shares. So share is a unit of company's capital. It's a unit of company. It's a unit of company capital. It's a unit of company capital. Now, let's look at the characteristics of shares. One, can be used to measure members' liability. Can be used to measure members' liability. How do you explain? You know, at least you know it can be used to measure members' liability. What's the explanation? What is the explanation? How is it used to measure members' liability? That the liability of the members is to the extent of the unpaid shares. So therefore, the liability you have in the company, in a company, is the amount of shares you have not paid. If they are fully paid, you have no liability. So in the event of the winding up of a company, members are called upon to pay for the shares they have not paid up for. Are you together? So the liability, your liability in a company is to the amount of shares that you have acquired. Are you together? Now, anytime you pay for those shares, you reduce your liability in that company. When you have paid for them fully, you don't have any liability. Are we together? Yes. They wind up. Yes. If that one is not, she's asking a question that let's in a scenario where all shareholders have paid up their shares and the company is being wound up. That one now will be upon the court to make determinations. And most likely they are likely to recover that. The creditors are likely to lose their money. Are you together? Yes. Now, it can also be used to measure members' interest in the company. Are we together? So because with the number of shares that you have, it determines the amount of dividend payable. It determines the amount of dividend payable. Then it is a series of covenant. Series of covenant. You know what is a covenant? What is a covenant? A covenant is an agreement. It's an agreement. Are we together? And therefore, it's a series of covenants between the members and the company. It's a series of covenants between the members and the company. And then we can also say it is a personal property. Personal property that can personal property. Indeed, stop at that point. It's a personal property and then it is transferable. Transferable is a characteristic on its own. Transferable is a characteristic on its own. Then shares grant a member certain primary and secondary rights. Shares will give you certain rights. So rights of shareholders, rights of shareholders. Let's look at them. Primary right to dividend. Is that true? Shareholders are entitled to dividend. Right to vote, right to voting, and right to capital, to return of capital in winding up of the company. Is that understood? I think yesterday we talked about classification of membership rights. What was the classification? Classification of membership rights. The first class was classification of membership rights. The first one was? Yes? Wow, you've forgotten. Classification of membership rights. There are those rights that are exercised by members as a group. Which name did we give to those groups? Rights. Corporate membership rights. There are those rights that are exercised by members as individual membership rights. There are those rights that are exercised by the company itself. What did the name did we give it? Corporate rights. So at the individual membership rights, that's what we talked about, the right to vote, right to dividend, and right to capital, to return of capital in the event of winding up. Are we together? Yes. Right to return of capital in the event of winding up. And you understood what it means by return of capital. That we said, we gave an example, and we said when you buy shares in a company, you'll never be given that money back. You'll never have that money back. The number, you know, when you invest in shares, let's say you bought shares worth 10,000 shillings in Safaricom. Will you ever get these 10,000 shillings back? You cannot. You can only, this money can only be returned to you in the event of winding up. Are you getting? You can maybe recover this money when you are paid in terms of dividend. Maybe you say this year they have paid us in 1%, 10%, 20%. So that is how you'll be recovering your investment. However, this capital can only be returned in the event of winding up. So therefore we say right to capital or to return of capital in the event of winding up. Secondary rights, right to receive notices in general meetings. Are we together? Right to receive copies of balance sheet, right to copies of the memorandum and articles, right to inspect minute books of general meetings, right to inspect copies of charge, to inspect copies of charge, various registrar maintained by the company, petition for the alternatives remedy in the event of oppression, not operation, it's oppression. Kindly correct your handout if you have the hard copy. In the event of oppression of the minority. Are you together? Yes. 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 Yes, Ati? After you've bought shares in a company, once you have, the word is, you are allotted shares in a company, you cannot be able to return those shares to the company. You can only transfer those shares to someone else. So that's the only way. Probably you want to dispose those shares, you can transfer those shares to someone else. You get back the money. But if like the shares of that company are going down and they are not marketable, then you know it's difficult to get a buyer. Is that clear? Yes. That makes sense. Eh? You can only transfer those shares to someone else. You remember we talked about it in membership? Sindio? You remember the membership of a company and how people become members, how they cease to become members? Yes. Now, types of shares. Yes. Point number, right to inspect copies of charge kept by various registrar maintained by the company. Right to inspect copies of charge. You remember when we talked about important documents, and even online students kindly be sending your questions and be reading them. And you remember when we talked about various charges, various important documents kept in the registrar, kept in the registered office of the company. One of them was the register of charges. And we said charges are those properties that the company has charged. To charge means to use it as a security. So for instance, if the owner of this building has charged this property, it means he has used this property as a security, and that is recorded in the register of charges. That one is recorded in the register of charges. And the members have the right, as a secondary right, to inspect that register of charges. Is that clear? That's okay. Any other question? Online students, I can't see your questions. Okay. Now we move to the next types of shares. Types of shares. And other types of shares, we have ordinary shares, preference shares, founders shares. You remember these founders shares? Given to whom? It's one of the ways to reward whom? The promoters. For corporate shares or employees shares. It's not employer, employees shares and treasury shares. Majorly for the purpose of this class, we are going to focus on the first two. And ordinary shares. Ordinary shares, note that ordinary shareholders are the owners of the company. Ordinary shareholders are the owners of the company. It's also called equity share capital. So whenever you hear the word equity share capital, it refers to the share capital that is formed by the ordinary shares. Are you together? I think there's a point that where you use the word equity share capital. Where was it? Yeah. We'll go back to where we talked about for a company to be said to be holding another company, a company to be a subsidiary of the other. What was the first point? Of the equity share capital. Sindio, the word equity. So meaning it doesn't refer to holding of the preference. It is equity share capital. Sawa. And equity share capital therefore refers to the ordinary shares. Members holding ordinary shares are said to be the owners of the company. These are the owners of the company. What are the rights attached to the ordinary shareholders? The same thing, the same primary rights. What are the primary rights? One, right to vote. Two, right to dividend. Three, right to return of capital in the event of winding up. So we can see them. So those are the same rights that are attached to the ordinary shareholders. Now we talk of preference. This question is very common. Why are they called preference? Why are they called preference? One is that they earn dividend first before other class of shares. They earn dividend first before any other class of shares. They earn dividend first. So meaning when we declare dividend, we first of all pay them. Are we together? And two, they earn dividend at a fixed rate. They earn dividend at a fixed rate. So meaning if we declare that this year we are going to pay 2 million dividend, we may say there is a fixed rate of dividend for preference shares. Of this dividend, 20% or even 50% should go to who? To preference. Are you together? Yes. And we shall be talking about the variation of class rights. These are the words that you'll be hearing in this class. Variation of class rights. Now, what does it refer? For instance, if we want to change this from 20 and we want to change it to 15%. See, now we are varying the class rights. Sindio, that they are entitled to a fixed rate of dividend of 20%, and we now want to start giving them at 10%. So now the exam, because we shall read the procedure of variation of class rights. And if you can remember, yesterday as we talked about corporate membership rights, one of the rights under the corporate membership rights was right to petition against variation of class rights. Right to petition to court against or right to object to variation of class rights. Right to object to the variation of class rights. What it meant is that if we want to vary this from 20, we move it to 10%, then holders of this class, at least 15% of the holders of this class can petition the court objecting that variation. Yeah. So they earn a fixed rate of dividend, and in the event of winding up, they are given preferential right to the repayment of capital. And when they are classified as cumulative, the arrears of dividend cannot be lost, but is carried forward to subsequent years. So I'm going to explain about those terms to do with cumulative. But the first thing, why are they preference? One, they are paid dividend first before any other class of shares holders. Two is that they earn a fixed rate of dividend. Three is that they are given first preference in return of capital. They are given their capital is returned first before any other class of shareholders in the event of winding up. And then four, that those ones who are cumulative shareholders, cumulative means that if the dividend is not paid this year, it is carried forward to subsequent years. It is carried forward to subsequent years. So if we do not get dividend this year, 20%, now if the company does not declare dividend, this is carried forward to other years. So you've not been paid for the last 3 years. So meaning the dividend that you are going to declare, we should be given 60%. So we should be given 60%. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Is it very common to now investing much on the share capital side because you know how many fixed
rate of dividend? Yeah, it is assured.
Then they are protecting themselves because the people that are investing in that are the directors.
Shares, eh?
On preference side.
Yes, yes.
When you do ordinary shares, you are going to become a director. We don't have it. The preference, the person isn't going to.
Or 20 years, yes.
That in case of winding up, we lose.
Okay. Yeah, in the event of winding up, the preference shares are protected. You know why they are protected? They are not the owners. For them, they are just investors. And indeed, the way you've said that even when it comes to the right to stand for elections for directors, election of directors, you cannot be voted, you cannot be elected on the basis of holding preference shares because you are not a owner. This is just an investor. Sindio? Yeah. Now, what I'm saying, if it's cumulative preference shares, you know, we shall be talking about classification of preference shares. There is cumulative and non-cumulative. Cumulative, if we do not declare dividend this year, it is carried forward to subsequent years. So now, next year, if we declare a dividend, this fixed rate of dividend, we shall also have to, it will be carried forward to other subsequent years. And therefore, if you are to be paid 20%, and last year we were not paid, it should be 40%. That makes sense, when it is cumulative. Are you together? Yes. Any dividend not paid is carried forward. That makes sense, eh? Yeah. I have answered the question there. Why they prefer preference shares? Because there is a little bit of certainty. There's a bit of certainty. Yeah. Yes.
When somebody joins us, by default to become a member of an adopter or you specify.
No, for you to be in circle, lazima ukuwe wewe ni shareholder, yani kuna ile pesa inakatwa kila mtu ambaye
Yeah.
So it means you're a shareholder. So how nowadays circle wameanza kuleta the crowd now, wanaleta another product about the share capital. The capital uko na fixed
Rate.
dividend. No. Sasa ile fixed dividend unapata a lot of directors wana invest kwa preference sana, sababu ordinary imewaambia kutakuwa director akija kuwa na labda 3 million shares or 5, naona atafikisha 5 million. Lakini kwa preference sababu anaona ina cover, anaweka kama 20.
Yes.
So in fact that that is the current crowd.
Yeah. And as preference shareholder at the same time. So you see, you are at liberty to invest to any form of shares. You may hold, for instance, 5 million ordinary shares and 20 million preference shares. Now, companies, under the company's articles of association, the way she's saying, maybe the company's articles of association has stated that for you to start elections as a director in this company, you must be a holder of 10 million ordinary shares. So you now reach to the minimum of 10 million ordinary shares that will allow you to stand in for elections. Is that clear? Then you invest more into preference shares because there is assurance of a fixed rate of dividend. You are paid first before any other class of shares, and you have an assurance that in the event of winding up, your capital will be returned first before any other class of shares. And 4 is that in the event it's cumulative, it is carried forward to subsequent years. That's clear, Cindy? Yeah.
I think given that first priority.
No, they are not given, they are not considered as creditors. Indeed, when you shall be talking about the winding up of a company, we shall not talk about the preference or the priorities. We give priorities to taxes of the government, then wages and salaries, then the creditors. Now, before now we pay the ordinary shareholders, the preference shareholders. Is that clear? Yeah. So now classification of preference shares. Classification of preference shares. 1, it can either be cumulative or non-cumulative or non-cumulative. So cumulative are those shares whose arrears are not of dividend are not lost but carried forward to subsequent years when dividend will be declared. While non-cumulative, such arrears are not carried forward but are lost. That makes sense. So with cumulative, dividend is carried forward to subsequent years when it will be declared, whereas with the non-cumulative, dividend is not carried forward. Are we together? Yes. That makes sense? Yes. Now, participating and non-participating. Non-participating are those who earn a dividend at a fixed rate and participate in the balance of profits with ordinary shareholders. So they earn here at their fixed rate of dividend, and at the same time, they also they participate in the sharing of the ordinary or of the dividend allocated to the ordinary shareholders. Are we together? Yes. So they earn dividend, they participate they earn their fixed rate of dividend and also participate in the share of the dividend to the share given to the ordinary shareholders. That makes sense? Are we together? Yeah, so they also have a right to share in the surplus assets of the company in the event of. So what happens? Why they participate in two ways? One, they will participate in the share of the dividend allocated to the ordinary shareholders. And then when they are in the surplus, we have returned capital to everybody. We have paid everyone. And now there is this 700 million remaining here. Now we have already paid balances to everyone. Sawa. Now the 700 million shillings remaining here, what do we call that? That's what we are calling surplus. Who is entitled to the surplus? See, the ordinary shareholders, because they are the owners of the company. But at the same time, if the preference shareholders are participating preference shareholders, they also participate in the share of the surplus in the event of winding up. So therefore, they participate in two ways. One, they, after earning their fixed rate of dividend, they also participate in the share of dividend allocated to the ordinary shareholders. And secondly, they also participate in the share of the surplus in the event of winding up. So then, dividend paid to the preference shareholders is fixed, but the below points should be remembered as regards to priority. So, examiner atakuuliza, explain 4 rules in regard to payment of dividend to preference shareholders. Explain 4 rules. Explain 4 rules in regard to the payment of dividend to preference shareholders. 1, payment of dividend is entirely at the discretion of the directors, and if they decide to transfer the whole of the profit to capital reserves, no one can question the decision. What are we saying? Is it a must that the shareholders are paid dividend every year? Is it a must? What happens? Can I tell you who declares the dividend? Now, the directors recommend. Can you use the word? Directors and the shareholders declare. Indeed, one of the agenda of AGM, is to declare, is to do what? Is to declare dividend, is to declare dividend. One of the reasons, kwa hivyo mtu kuna swali naulizangwa ati sometimes directors, when you shall be talking about the topic of directors, kuna kitu tutasoma hapo, that directors and shareholders keep conflicting. They keep conflicting. But then there are separate rules. There are separate rules between shareholders and directors. Who can give me 4 functions of four rights of a shareholder? For instance, for rights of shareholders we've already discussed. Isn't your right to vote, right to attend AGM, right to return of capital in the event of winding up. But what is the agenda of AGM? Agenda of AGM? To approve, in company we use the word approve accounts. To approve accounts. Number 2, elect the election of directors. Election of directors. Number 3, yes? Appoint auditors. Appoint auditors. Number 4, declare dividend. To declare dividend. Are we together? What about directors? What is the agenda of board meetings? When directors meet, what do? 1 is to recommend dividend. Now they recommend, and then who declares? The shareholders declare. But then it is to the discretion of the directors to recommend. So they may fail to recommend. Are you together? Yes. But now, if they do not recommend, and the preference shareholding is cumulative, it is carried forward to the subsequent years. Number 2, if the dividend was not declared and the company goes into liquidation, even preference shareholders will not be paid. Are you together? Yes. If the dividend was not declared and the company goes into liquidation, then it ceases to be a debt. It's not a debt to the company. Sawa? Yes. So meaning that you cannot say that it was carried forward and it was cumulative. If it was not declared, it is not a debt. It's only a debt if it was declared. It was declared. Payment of the dividend to preference shareholder only become due once the dividend has been recommended and approved and the date of payment is due. If it was declared before the company went into liquidation and was not paid, then the right will not be lost. That is, they will be paid. So your point 4 na 2 ni kama zinafanana. If it was not declared, it cannot be paid. If it was declared, then and it was not paid, then it will not, the right will not be lost. If it was declared, they should be paid. Tunaelewa? If it was declared, they should be paid. It's a right for them to be paid. But if it was not declared, then the company does not have any obligation to pay them. And then it is the discretion of who? The directors to recommend. It's the discretion of the directors to recommend. Redeemable and irredeemable. So you know what is redeemable? Yes? Redeemable means? Yeah? The company can buy back. Sindio, that's true. The company can buy back. A question? Any question?
Yeah. So it's like before,
Mm-hmm.
so they say if it was declared,
Mm.
the company
Mm.
paid,
Mm-hmm.
the company goes into liquidation. So now can you pay?
If the company, if the company goes into liquidation and has not paid it, then it becomes an obligation. It becomes a debt against the company. So the company is supposed to pay them. If there is, before we say that there is surplus capital, then we should also be clear with the preference shareholders. That is, if there is capital remaining, before we even pay, before we pay the ordinary shareholders, we return their capital, we give the preference, we give that preference to the preference shareholders to pay their dividend before now we start paying ordinary shareholders their capital. Ordinary shareholders will come last because they are the owners of the company. That's making sense? Yes. Redeemable, we said the company can buy back those shares. Irredeemable, the company cannot buy back those shares. Conditions for the company to buy back it. Conditions for issuing redeemable preference. Any question you asked about conditions, always have this answer. Authority of the Articles of Association. In every question. Sawa? Tuko pamoja? Authority of the Articles of Association is usually the first answer. Then passing of a resolution. Hiyo ni answer pia haikosagi. Sawa? Passing, kama hujui answer yote, anza na authority of the Articles of Association and passing of a resolution. Kwa hii ni ordinary resolution. Sawa? Ingine itakuwa special resolution. Na mnajua, what are the matters that require special resolution? Examiner atakuuliza hivyo, tutasoma kwa meetings, yes, but we need to know earlier. What are the matters that require special? Kuna kitu tumejua kinataka special resolution? Gani? Alteration of the memorandum of association to change of the name of a company, change of the name of a 3. Though hatujasoma, tutasoma kwa hii topic, reducing the share capital. Vitu zote that reducing the share capital. Sawa? What else? Na kama hujui answer zingine ongea kuhusu hata nini hizo vitu za articles of memorandum of association zote, even the alteration of the objects of the company requires a special resolution. Sindio? Yes. And even to change the registered office of the company, to change the registered office of the company, to move it from one place to the other, it requires which kind of a resolution? Anything to do with MOA requires a special resolution. Now, ordinary resolution ni mambo kama hia to declare. Yeah, sasa nimejua. Anything that is done in the AGM requires an ordinary resolution. Anything that is done in the AGM requires an ordinary resolution. Therefore, which matters require an ordinary resolution? One. Simnajua business of ordinary business of the AGM ni gani? One. Appointment of auditors. Election of directors. declaration of dividend, and approval of accounts. So those 4 matters require what? Which kind of resolutions? Ordinary resolution. So meaning tumejua business of AGM, tumejua ni hizo. Na matters that require an ordinary resolution ni hizo. So examiner akiuliza ya 5, si pia utamwambia issuance of redeemable preference shares. Si ndio? Si tumeona ina require ordinary resolution. Yes. The company's capital must be divided into different classes of shares. It must be divided into different classes of shares. Like now in this, we have divided into different classes of shares, ordinary, preference, and then the issue must be disclosed in the company's prospectus, and the registrar must be notified of the issue within 14 days. Sasa, kwa conditions, kuna zile hazitawahi kosa. Authority of the articles of association, resolution, and notifying the registrar. Kwa kila kitu tunasoma, kama kuna gani ingine tulisema notifying the registrar within 14 days. What did we say? Yeah? Alteration of the MO? Yes. Notifying the registrar is always the last point. Sawa? Yes. Now, we have said that for issuing of redeemable preference shares, 1, let me see whether I can remember. 1 is that authority of the articles of association. 2, we pass an ordinary resolution. 3, the registrar must be notified within 14 days. And now, hizo haziko kwa kila answers ni kama disclosure in the prospectus, and the shares must be divided into different classes of shares. Shares of the company must be divided into different classes of shares. Condition for redemption. Now, you know the difference between issuing and redemption. What's the difference? Issuing ni kupeana, si ndio? To give. Na redemption ni kubuy back. Now let's see the conditions. The answers are more or less the same. 1, it must be authorized by the articles. Simona ni the same. The shares must be fully paid. You must have paid for them fully. And 3 is that the shares must be redeemed out of profits. They cannot be redeemed out of capital. They cannot be redeemed out of capital. We need to protect the capital of the company. So they can only be redeemed out of profits. Then any premium payable. Do you know what is a premium? A premium means maybe you had bought those shares at 10 shillings. And any amount above, what do we call this 10 shillings? The amount you bought the shares. Mulisomea wapi hiyo? Mnaonekana nyinyi mko sawa kwa company law, si ndio? This is called par value or nominal value. This is called the par value. The original, the value at par. The value at par. Ile value ulinunua nayo. Any value below, any amount above the par value is what we call premium. So now, if we go say 15 shillings, the 5 shillings is the premium. Sawa. And any amount, if the amount is below the par value, that's what we call issue of shares at a discount. Ni video nini mmewatch? This looks good. That's true. Sindio? Sa kama huko unajua hivi wede watch video before, Sindio? Now, any premium payable must be provided out of profits. So redemption must be done out of profits, and even any premium payable must be redeemed out of profits. And if the shares are redeemed otherwise than out of proceeds of the special, the capital redemption reserve fund account must be created. So, mnajua kwa FR or even FA, we keep creating accounts. So, capital redemption, we need to create. For us to redeem what do we say? For us to redeem these shares, we must create a capital redemption reserve fund, where we shall create an account called CRRF, Capital Redemption Reserve Fund, and therefore we shall be redeeming these shares from that fund called Capital Redemption Reserve Fund, and the registrar must be notified within that days. Within that days. Convertible and non-convertible. Convertible means they can be converted into ordinary shares. They can be converted into ordinary shares. Non-convertible cannot be converted into ordinary shares. We are done with those kind of shares, preference. we look at deferred or founders or management shares. And deferred are those shares given to the promoters as a way to remunerate them. As a way to remunerate them. Then corporate or employees shares are given to employees as a way to motivate them. They are given to employees as a way to motivate them. And then treasury shares, this is acquisition of shares by a limited company of its own shares in accordance with the Act. So this is when a company buys its own shares. When a company buys its own shares, though it is illegal. So what we shall be saying, exceptions to a company buy back its own shares. Are you together? Yes, sir. Transfer of shares. Transfer of shares. So it's a voluntary conveyance, transfer of a title and shares from one person to another, because we said that shares are property that is transferable. Shares in public and private companies. In either public or private companies, we need to note that shares are transferable. Shares are transferable. Now, what about for public? Now, what happens with private companies? We gave an example that despite those shares are transferable, in private companies, are they freely transferable? The transfer is restricted. And what did we say about it? Yes? It can only be transferred among members. Are you together? Whereas with the public, shares are freely transferable. Shares are freely transferred. And that's why we call them public companies. Sindio? Because they can float their shares to the members of the public. Yeah. Now, restricted is where we are saying that you can only transfer those shares to the existing members. Now, this existing member, therefore, you as the existing member, therefore you have some rights. That's what we call preemptive rights. That's what we call preemptive rights. That before you that members of the private company cannot transfer their shares freely, but they can only transfer their shares to the existing members. Are you together? So as an existing member, my other members cannot transfer their shares freely to the members of the public, but they should first of all get an existing member to transfer those shares to. Are you together? Yes. So we can read. So shares are freely transferable. However, the directors may declare to the register of shares not being fully paid shares. So shares, the directors may refuse to transfer those shares freely in the event the shares are not fully paid. Even in the event the shares are not fully paid. In the event the shares are not fully paid. To a person of whom the shares shall not approve, on when the company has a lien right to retain shares as a security for a debt. So when can the directors of a public company refuse a transfer of shares? When can directors of a public company refuse a transfer of shares? Number one, if the shares are not fully paid. Number two, on when the company has the right of lien. When the company has the right of lien, you have used your shares as a security for a loan. You have used your shares as a security for a loan. Now, with the private companies, and I think I'll share, there's another handout that I think I have done some corrections. I'll share it with you. Sawa. Yeah, because there are grammatical errors with this handout. I'm sorry for that. So I'll share with you another handout. The same handout, but now with the better corrections. So transfer of shares is restricted. With the private companies shares, transfer of shares is restricted. So this is preemption clause that requires directors to offer the shares to existing members at first instance. So the preemption right requires that those shares should be offered to the existing members at first instance. So kwa swali ilikuwa imeulizwa, define the term preemption clause. It is the requirement that directors must offer the shares in a private company, transfer of shares to a in the event of transfer of shares, the shares should be first offered to the existing members. Tuko pamoja? Yeah, conferring upon directors total discretion to refuse to the transfer of shares. So the rule on exercise of the discretion to refuse the registered transfer of shares by directors the rule for them to exercise this right. One, to exercise their power, the directors must consider the transfer and take a decision to refuse to register it. So in other words, the first thing is that the directors must consider the application. The directors must consider the application. Are we together? Before they refuse to register the transfer of shares, they must consider the application. Two, the directors in reaching their decision must act bona fide. They must act bona fide. They must act bona fide. So like now the word bona fide there is misspelled, it's supposed to be bona fide. Are you together? Yes. I'm sorry for that. Then where articles specify grounds of refusal, then the same must be communicated to the shareholder. Where articles specify the ground of refusal, then the same should be communicated to the shareholders. I want to see whether the other handout has the same issues. I think I'm going to share the other handout I have. I first of all confirm it whether it has the same issues, but I don't. Yeah, I'll get, yeah. So let's go on, and then I'll send it to you. Then the other ground, the power of refusal must be exercised within a reasonable time, and companies required to give a notice of refusal within 60 days. So the one where the articles specify the grounds of refusal, the same must be communicated. So where the articles specify the grounds of refusal, directors must cite that article. Directors must cite that article. So discuss 6 rules. Are they 5 rules in regard to the preemption clause? Discuss 5 rules in regard to the preemption clause. Number 1, you first of all say that preemption refers to the right, the right of directors to restrict. Yeah, that it restricts that the transfer of shares must be to the existing members. So the rules on the exercise of the discretion to refuse to the register of transfer of shares are the following. 1. Who has the past papers? Mkona past papers? Mmepatiwa? Because there's a question I want us to refer to this. You have the past papers, eh? I want us to read one of the past papers and then I give you the answers to that question. Yeah, I can post it on the board. On the wall, so that's okay. You have them. You have the past papers. Please do. Please post them right away. I have not carried them, but I should get them after this class. Now, the question in 2020 had asked, November 2016, so I think November 2016, question 7B. November 2016, question 7B. You should have the past papers with you, please. Indeed, I'll be teaching and making a lot of reference to the past papers. Before we now, that's what I'll be doing. November 2016, I should be doing that, Cindy, a lot, so that you see how the questions are set. November 2016, question 7B. Umeiona? Post those past papers, please. Online students, kindly, are we together? No, you must get the past papers with you. I think I should call Kazungu, call for me Steve so that he comes and we get the past papers right away. Whether you are posting, you've posted, kindly post in the group. It's uploading. It's okay. It's okay. Tell Kazungu. Kazungu. One BST. Aniprint past papers na print ati nini? Na print page mzima. Page mzima kubwa. Side. Let's do it fast so that you have gotten the question. November 2016, you have it. Eh? What does it ask? November 2016 question. 1, define the term preemption rights. Can you define it? Define the term preemption rights. You can define it.
Yes.
What does it mean? Yeah, shares can only be transferred to the existing members. Sindio? Now, identify 4 instances when preemption rights do not apply. I want to answer that question. Sawa. When preemption rights do not apply. When preemption rights do not apply. When preemption rights do not apply. November 2016. When preemption rights do not apply. Number 1, preemption rights do not apply. Number one, memorandum or articles of a private company exclude them. Memorandum or articles of a company exclude them. Memorandum or articles of a company exclude them. Memorandum or article of a private company. Memorandum or articles of a private company exclude them. The company passes a special resolution to exclude them. The company passes a special resolution to exclude them. Number 2, 3, the shares are issued for non-cash consideration. The shares are issued for non-cash consideration. The shares are issued for non-cash consideration. And then number 4, shares are within employees' share scheme. Shares are within employees' share scheme. Shares are within employees' share scheme. Shares are issued for non-cash consideration, and 4, shares are within employees' share scheme. Are you together? Yes. So meaning we have said that preemption clause requires directors to offer shares to existing members at first instance. So that's what preemption clause means. That shares should be offered to the existing members at first instance. Note, even the shares of a private company can also be offered to the members of the public if the existing members do not want those shares. Are you together? But there must be a proof that they were offered at first instance to the existing members. So who is enjoying those rights? Who is enjoying that right? Existing members. That preemption rights means that shares of a private company should be offered by the directors to the existing members at first instance. So that's what it means by what? Are we getting? Preemption right, which is the same as the preemption clause. Which is the same as the preemption clause. That the shares of a private company should be offered to the existing members at first instance. Then the last question asks, describe 2 rules on allotment of shares by public companies. Describe 2 rules on allotment of shares. Describe 2 rules on allotment of shares by public companies. 2 rules on allotment of shares by public companies. Number 1, but there are so many rules that we are going to study, but a key rule is that the company must issue a prospectus. The company must issue a prospectus. The prospectus must be filed with the registrar. The prospectus must be filed with the registrar. The prospectus must be filed with the registrar. And then minimum capital subscription must be received. Minimum capital subscription must be received. Minimum capital subscription must be received before allotment. So we must receive minimum. Members subscribe first to the shares of a company, then we allot. Do you know what allot is? To issue. Allot is to issue. Are we together? Before now we start issuing the shares, we must receive the minimum. Can you finish? The minimum as stated in the prospectus. Are we together? Yes. So we've gotten the rules on allot. What are the rules? What have we called them? Preemption clause. When they are not applicable. When they are not applicable. 1, if the MOA and DOA exclude them. 2, special resolution exclude them. Shares are issued for non-cash consideration. And number 4, within the employee's share scheme. That's okay. Now we look at the rules, and we've also understood the rules in regard to the directors refusing to register transfer of shares. Are you together? Rules in regard to the directors refusing to register the transfer of shares. Number 1. Yeah, the one is that. Yes. They must consider the transfer. They must consider the transfer. Number 2, you said they must act bona fide. 3, they must cite it must be done in accordance to the articles of association. It must be done in accordance to the articles of association. And 4, it must be exercised within a reasonable time. And then the company must give the notice to the shareholder within 60 days. Is that making sense? So can you now try to see whether you can remember all of them? Close your eyes and see. Yes?
Those are the same as a company
May decline to? Yeah, may decline, may decline a transfer. Circumstances under which a company may decline a transfer of shares. 1, circumstances in which, so if it is in contravention with the articles of association, that's 1. There are bona fide reasons. It's the same. Sawa. Yeah, it's the same. Yes. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, that means can also look for, if there is no one who wants those shares among the existing members, then we can look for a member outside the company to take up those shares. Private.
I think they don't get it, but just something.
Within the members, for this, so the preemption clause states that before the directors must look for the existing members to take up any transfer of shares at first instance. But let's make an assumption that the existing members do not want those shares, what happens? And there is a person who is there outside wants those shares. Probably you are the shareholder and you want to transfer your shares. Then at first instance, you should transfer those shares to the existing members as the preemption clause states. What if nobody among the members who wants those shares and you have somebody there outside who can take up those shares? What happens? You include them. Sindio? Yeah. So that's why we are saying under the preemption, yeah, he becomes part of the member. Yeah. So that's why we are saying preemption right is where that is the right that directors should transfer shares of a private company to the existing members at first instance. So the priority is given to the existing members. Yeah. So shares may be transferred by one, a registered holder, a personal representative, or a trustee in bankruptcy. Is that clear? Is that making sense? Did we say who is a trustee in bankruptcy? Who is a trustee in bankruptcy? A person to whom shares are transmitted once the other person becomes. Now the shares have become his property, and therefore he can therefore transfer them to someone else. Who is a personal representative? To whom shares are transmitted once the owner dies. Shares are movable. Restriction on transfer of shares. So shares are movable property transferable in a manner provided by the Articles of Association. A transfer of shares to a state corporation without prior written consent from the Treasury is void. So meaning any transfer of shares of a government of a statutory company must be approved by the Treasury. And for a transfer of shares to be effected, a proper instrument of transfer must be presented to the company. Now we look at the procedure of transfer of shares. Total transfer. One, parties enter into an agreement to sell and buy shares. Two, they execute the proper instruments of transfer. Three, the executed instrument of transfer are presented for stamping and payment of tax. Four, the executed instrument of transfer and share certificate are presented to the company for registration of the transfer. Who presents them? We need to ask ourselves, who presents them? Is it the transferor or the transferee? Who is the transferor? Niulize, let me ask you a question. It's just the same. You know, this is a property. Eh? Kwa shamba, who presents the title deed? Kwa land registry. Huh? Okay. Who presents the land title deed to the land registry for transfer? Is it the buyer or the seller? The seller. Nyi mmenunua shamba kweli? Nimwitie ile Who has the whatever? We need to ask ourselves, who has the what do I call it? The obligation or the liability? Who is likely to lose? Amesha kulipa, si ndio? Sasa mtu asha kulipa pesa yake, ako na shughuli kama utatransfer au hautatransfer. Sasa unajua hiyo inahitaji wakili first. Na kuna pesa utalipa ya stamp duty wakuja wa value land. Who will pay that money? Mimi nikulipia na nimekuuzia land. Ni wewe sell, ni wewe buyer. It's the buyer. You see, the moment you have cleared with the seller, unamwambia hebu leta hiyo title deed. Usiende kutumia hii title deed kuchukua malone. Sawa? You know, he can use the title deed. He can attach the title deed for other things. So the moment you have cleared, indeed, the moment you enter into an agreement, what you do is sometimes, when you enter into an agreement, maybe you agree that you are going to pay 10% of the land. What you do is that you have the title deed in the custody of a lawyer. you both trust. Sawa. Now, the moment you clear paying, you take the possession of the title deed, and therefore it is your responsibility to have the land transferred as the buyer. That's making sense. Is that okay? Yeah. Juu sasa, Juu sasa nani ukishamaliza kunilipa, mimi hiyo story nimeondokea. Ukitaka kutransfer land transfer, ukisipotaka shauria. That's what I'm saying. It is therefore your obligation. It's your obligation as the buyer. It's your responsibility to have the land transferred because you are the one to lose. The seller has already gained what he wanted, the money. So even in terms of transfer of shares, the same. It's the responsibility of who? The transferor or the transferee? The transferee. Is that clear? Yes. So once the shares, he has been paid his consideration. Once he has been paid his consideration, then it's upon him to, once he has been paid, make sure past papers, notes, it's okay. So once the consideration has been paid, it's the duty of the transferee to have the shares transferred. And therefore, he will take hold of what? The share certificate. Are you together? Atachukua share certificate na akae nayo. Wewe usiende kutransfer those shares to someone else. Si ndio? Una get, eh? Yes. So the executed instrument of transfer, the share certificate, are presented to the company for registration of the transfer. On registration of the transfer, the share certificate is cancelled and another issued in the name of the transferor. Of the transferee, sorry, on the transferee, that's the buyer. Is that understood? Now try to cram it. The parties enter into an agreement, they execute the proper instruments of transfer are those forms that they fill. Sawa. Then the executed instrument of transfer are presented for stamping and payment of tax. Then the executed instrument of transfer and the share certificate are represented to the company by the transferee for registration. On registration of the transfer, the share certificate is cancelled and another issued in the name of the transferee. Is that okay? Yeah. What about partial transfer? Partial transfer. Partial transfer, sasa hapo kuna trick. Juu sasa hujampati, you've not transferred all the shares to him, eh? So you are not going to surrender the what? The certificate. Is that clear? You are not going to surrender the certificate of shares to the transferee. So that is where the trick will come. So we see the parties enter into an agreement, they execute the proper instruments of transfer, the executed instrument of transfer and the share certificate are presented to the company for certificate. The share certificate is retained by the company for cancellation. The certified instrument of transfer is presented for stamping. The certified instrument of transfer is presented to the company for registration. On registration, the share certificate is cancelled. So let's look at it again. So the partial transfer, the parties enter into an agreement, they execute the proper instruments of transfer. The executed instrument of transfer, the share certificate are presented to the company for certificate. The share certificate is retained by the company for cancellation. And then after cancellation is that the company will issue new share certificates. The company will issue new share certificates to both the transferor and the transferee. Is that making sense? The company will issue new share certificates to both the transferor and the transferee. That should be the last point. Are you together? Yes, yes. So certificate of transfer, certificate of transfer. In certain circumstances, the transferor will not surrender the certificate of the share certificate to the transferee. Have we seen that? The transferor will not surrender the share certificate to who? To the transfer. For instance, in the event of partial transfer. Now, what will he do? He will issue a certificate of transfer. He will issue a certificate of transfer. Is that understood? So certificate of transfer is issued when the transferor is not circumstances do not allow him to give the transferee the share certificate. And which are those circumstances? One of them is partial transfer. Let's see others. Circumstances when certification is also necessary. One, when the transferor is transferring only part of his holding. That is, in brackets, partial transfer. Number two, when the transferor is transferring also his shares to two or more of his transferees. Is that making sense? He's transferring to two or more. Sasa utapatia huyu, utapatia huyu. So you only give a certificate of transfer. Three, where the transferor has not yet received a certificate from the company, but has been issued with a document of title to the shares. That is allotment letter. So the owner of the shares does not have a share certificate, but has a document of title, e.g. a letter of allotment. And finally, where the transferee is not satisfied with the transferor, title to the shares. The transferee is doubting whether this share certificate is okay. So he needs a certificate of transfer signed. Sawa? Yes. Is that understood? Electronic transfer. Electronic transfer. And I want to make a question. I want to make a reference. I want to see the question that is common in regard to electronic transfer. I think I will get a question on this. There's a question that they like most about electronic transfer. And by the way, to keep our discussion alive, we can't be holding a Campanile class for just Monday and Sunday. Let's also keep it alive in WhatsApp. Sindio, can we keep it alive in WhatsApp? So we have we can even use that, or we form a group for Campanile. That's the best, Sindio. Yeah, and then I'll even be the one to draw most of the questions. Sindio kweli? And everybody to be active. Everybody to be active. Is that clear? Yes. So we are going to form a WhatsApp group. So every day we do like, sasa tunachagua, kama kesho tunaweza amua tuchague maswali ya nature and classification. On that other day, information, the other day membership, the other day shares. Sindio? We make it lively. Is that clear? Na mnyimu jibu, mtu anajibu. Tukiwa unakansa kamoja cheke yake wewe, rusha ansa yako hapo. Sawa, Sindio? Yes. Now, I want this electronic transfer, let me look at it in the next class, but today's class, I don't want to go without covering this question about forged transfer because it's a common question. It's a common question. So forged transfer is an instrument of transfer on which the signature is forged. It's called a forged instrument, and any transfer effected on such instrument is called a forged transfer. The transfer effected through a forged instrument is a nullity, and it confers no rights and imposes no obligations on the parties. So the questions that the examiner likes is consequences of a forged transfer. Consequences of a forged transfer. And the first answer is that the transfer effected through a forged instrument is null and void, or is a nullity. It is a what? Nullity, and it confers no rights and imposes no obligations on the parties. So legal rules in regard to a forged transfer. The first one is it's a nullity and confers no rights or obligations. No one is a nullity. 2, it is void and therefore cannot affect the title of the shareholder whose signature is forged. Number 1 is a nullity, 2 is void and therefore does not affect the title. It does not affect the title of the shareholder whose signature is forged. So the shares therefore remain with who? With the original owner, shareholder. 3, if a company has removed a shareholder name from the register in registering the transfer, it will be compelled to restore it. Tuko pamoja? Or to reinstate it. Number 4, the company must also pay dividends which have been declared during the time his name has been wrongly removed from the register. So any right he lost when his name has been removed from the register, the company must pay him back. For instance, it must pay back his dividends. Tuko pamoja? Then the company is equally liable to any person whom it had issued a share certificate from reliance of the forged document. Let me give you an example what we are saying here. A is the original shareholder. Wakati alikuwa na move huku nje, all of a sudden akapoteza certificate yake, ikakolektiwa na nani? Na B. Si ndio? Naye B did something in law we call misrepresentation. So what he did is that he forged the signature of who? He forged the signature of who? Are we getting? Akadanganya C kuwa hii certificate ni yake, chukua shares. Is he innocent? Is he innocent? So the company is therefore also liable to any part. So now B, what happened? Who issued the new share certificate to C? The company. Now what happens is that the transfer of shares, who you be, forged the certificate. You know, remember the transfer of shares. What happened in the transfer of shares? We said who presents the old share certificate to the company? The transferee or the transferor? The transferee is the one who presented the forged share certificate to the company. Is that true? But the signature was forged by who? By B. And therefore, then the C got a new share certificate. The new share certificate was issued to him by the company. Have you understood that case law now? Now, what now we are saying in this, the company is equally liable to any person whom it had issued a share certificate from reliance of the forged document. Even if he's the one who presented the forged share certificate that had been forged by who? By B. The company will still be liable to him. Who relied? Because he's the one who relied on the forged share certificate. Even if he's the one who presented the documents for transfer. Tuko pamoja? Yes. And then the company is required to be indemnified by the person who submits the forged transfer even if he was unaware. The company is required to be indemnified by the person who submits the forged transfer, even if he was unaware of the forgery. And then the person submitting a forged transfer can sue his forger or to recover his losses. I'm sorry for that. Let's go back to point number 5. I'm sorry. The company is equally liable to any person whom it had issued a share certificate from the reliance of the forged document. That share certificate. I'm sorry, now here we are going to introduce another person called D. Now, what we are saying is this, is that C is the one, the B is the one who forged the share certificate and gave that forged share certificate to who? To C. Then C is the one who submitted the share certificate to the company. Later on, C decided to transfer the shares to who? To D. So D is the one who relied. D is the party that is innocent. Are we together? So D is the one who is referred in point number 5. Are we getting? Go back to point number 5. That the company is equally liable to any person whom it had issued a share certificate from the reliance of the forged document. But now, point number 6 and 7 refers to who? Point 6 and 7 refers to? Point number 6 refers to who? The company is required to be indemnified by the person. C. Yes, C. The point number 6, the company is required to be indemnified by the person who submits the forged transfer, even if he was unaware of the forgery. Hakuwa anajua B ni kuforge forge. So who you see is the one who is supposed to indemnify the company. And then the person submitting a forged transfer can sue his forger. Who is the forger? B. To recover his losses. So meaning the person submitting a forged transfer, can sue his forger. Are you together? Are you together? And then the company can sue the person who submits the forged transfer. The company can sue the person who submits the forged transfer. And now with this party, he's required to be, his name should be reinstated in the register of members, and any dividend that was payable to him should be paid. Tuko pamoja? And then we say that any transfer based on the forged transfer is a nullity and it's also void. Can you discuss those 6 rules, 7 rules in regard to forged transfer? Can you master them and then you see whether you can discuss them? So number 1, any forged transfer is a nullity. Number 2, it is void and therefore does not affect the title. Any right attached, if a company has removed a shareholder name from the register, then it will be compelled to restore it. The company must also pay dividends. The company is equally liable to any person whom it had issued a share certificate from the reliance of the forged document. That refers to D, who is very innocent. Sindio? The company is required to be indemnified means to be compensated. The company should be indemnified by the person who submits the forged transfer. And then the person who submitting a forged transfer can sue the forger. Are we together so far? Are we together? Yes. So meaning we have agreed. I don't know whether I collect your contacts right away so that we form the group right away, even with the online students. Has everyone here subscribed to the videos, to the recorded videos? So that because the system now will be able to generate people who have subscribed to Company Law. Anyone who has not subscribed? You've not? Company Law. Oh, okay. So anyone else? So if you have not subscribed to the company law videos, I think I can take your contacts. If you have subscribed, then with the online students, as long as somebody has subscribed, I'll be able to get it from the system. Sindio? Then we shall create a WhatsApp group. And please, everybody to follow. Sindio? I can even be doing some, is it TikTok? Yeah? Small, yeah, the concept, yeah. Mm-hmm. 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 Okay, what happens is that the who submits, for instance, who is submit, okay, we say the who submits the transfer, the share certificate. It is C, yes. Yes. Mm-hmm. You note that it's not the share certificate that has been forged. It is the executed instruments of transfer. The instruments of transfer, what we mean is that, you know, the share certificate is the one that was, okay, B lost his certificate. A lost his certificate, and who collected it? B. So he has the original certificate with him. He has the share certificate of A, the original certificate that was given by the company. But now the instruments of transfer, he was able to forge the signature of A. 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 You get my point now? Yeah. So the share certificate was not forged. The share certificate uliangusha. Ni kama title deed uangushe title deed yako mahali na mtu achukue, si ndio? Sasa alafu aforge signature yako umetransfer shamba. Kwa hivyo ni vizuri pia ukae kama watu wa kitambo. Certificate unaziweka wapi? Chini ya kitanda. Kabox ingine huko. Unaona vyenye akina shosho walikuwa wanafanya. Kuna box haifunguliagwi na mtu yote. Sawa? Hiyo box ni yeye tu anajua funguo iko pale. Sawa? You get me now? It's the instruments of transfer that were forged. It's the instruments of transfer that were forged.
Why are we like charging B and yet
B is being, yeah?
B is going to
C is the one who is supposed to indemnify the company because he's the one who presented the forged transfer. If a forged instrument of transfer, even if he was unaware of the forgery.
Yeah, that is what I meant.
C is the one, yeah?
That is what I meant. C is
yeah, that's what the Company Act states. Even if he's unaware of the
the definition of forgery,
mm-hmm.
you see that anyone who present a forged document.
Mm-hmm.
So by not presenting
mm-hmm.
a forged document,
mm-hmm.
but the fact that he presented it,
mm-hmm.
he also
he's the one.
Yeah, he's the one to compensate the company.
Yes.
That presentation
Mm.
is forgery that itself.
Mm.
So that has been borrowed from the penalty.
Oh. The forgery, yeah. The one who presents the forged transfer is the one who is guilty. Sindio?
Yeah,
yeah.
Because we always rely on the constitution which consists penal code.
Mm-hmm.
If we act in a company act, it can later be enacted in the
yeah.
So it is a borrowing from the
main laws. For instance, the Constitution.
Offense,
yeah.
Offense.
Mm-hmm.
The offense right now is the forgery.
Yeah.
So what did he see? He presented
the forged yeah. Penal code, yeah. So now that's why you are saying now the company C is the one who presented. And therefore he's the one who is supposed to indemnify the company. And then he will now sue who? B, the forger.
That is the same thing which happens in the police handling stolen property.
Handling stolen property. So the person who now is caught with the stolen property
And again,
is the one who is, eh? Mhm,
There is transmission, there is handling,
mhm,
there is many, but which
mhm,
is called the storage.
mhm, mhm.
So it is not just about describing a certain thing up at you. There are other things, you know, subsection 1.
Mm,
So
mm, mm.
it's all about the whole section.
Oh, of the law.
Handling stolen
Goods, yeah.
lakini yake kama ya mwingine,
Mm.
there are 4 of them,
Mm.
but each is anajibu
Mm.
mashtaka kivya.
Yeah,
So
kivyake.
even
Mm.
itakuwa ni actor, mwingine naye akapresent.
Mm.
So huyu B
Mm.
pia anaweza tafuta kwenye ilifanyiwa.
Mm.
So
Mm. A whole spectrum, eh? Yeah, true.
The person that is protected. The others right in the person who do the due diligence.
Yes. Yeah, it's the person to whom the shares are being transferred to do the due diligence, to get the proper documents, to check whether the ID corresponds with the share certificate. Is he the one? Sindio? Yes. You do not transfer that responsibility to the company. That's okay, sindio? So.